Hi guys, it's Christian Harris from Slip Safety Services. Thanks for attending the IOSH Logistics and Retail webinar on prevention of slips, trips and falls in the workplace. You'd think I could say those words without stumbling, but there we go. Recently, or if you didn't manage to actually attend, I think this will be sent out to you for registering anyway. So thanks for showing some intent. There were a few Q&As that we didn't get to during the session because there were a number of questions asked, and so I said that I would do a quick video to run through some of those. Before I start on the questions, I just thought I would recap on a couple of bits. So CHIMES is something really to remember, which are the 6 reasons that people slip, and these are the key principles that will drive your slip safety in your business. CHIMES stands for contamination, heal, individual, maintenance, environment, and surface. If you watch the recording of the webinar, we go into a bit more detail around each of those points. There's also some good videos on my LinkedIn and my YouTube channel, which delve into more detail for CHIMES as well. And there's some stuff on the website as well. If you're interested to know how you're doing on CHIMES, you can take our digital scorecard, which basically is a self-assessment tool. It takes 5 minutes to complete. A number of you have done it already, and I've actually had some follow-up calls with people, which and they've been finding it really useful. But basically, this will ask you a series of questions, yes/no questions. And at the end of it, you'll get a score for each of the CHIMES as a percentage, and then you'll get an overall score as well. So what this gives you basically is a bit of a better understanding of where you currently are on the 6 CHIMES, where you've got the most room for improvement, and therefore a bit of a roadmap on where you should focus your efforts to try to improve, to reduce the frequency of accidents, the level of harm, and the cost of claims. And as a bonus, which I mentioned on the webinar as well, anybody that takes the scorecard and then does book in a call with me to run through the report and deep dive into some of the areas that pertain to you specifically, will get this big bundle of free stuff, including a half-price slip test from us, some software, some safety footwear resources, some really interesting products around cleaning and maintenance as well, and various other things too. So I do encourage you to take the scorecard to benefit from all of that stuff. So I recapped on CHIMES because, let me pull up these questions. The questions kind of broadly fell into the categories of CHIMES. So we'll start with a couple of questions about contamination. So the first question was, are the risks for slipping of water the same as for oil, for example? Very good question. The answer is that oil is obviously more viscous than water. And so certain floor surfaces that are textured can withstand more water contamination on them before they become too slippery than oil, because the oil is going to, if you think about it, fill in the peaks and troughs of the floor more readily. And that's why in environments like commercial kitchens, you typically find more textured floors, because they will withstand the oil. They're designed to withstand the oil and obviously water that could get on the floor as well. If you think about, a shopping centre or a supermarket or something like that, where you've got a smoother, shiny floor, then it realistically won't make a difference whether it's oil or water or indeed dust. A very small amount of contamination on a smooth floor is going to make that floor quite slippery. Second question around contamination was talking about loose polythene sheets, which are generally used in construction sites to protect the floor before handover. And the comment is, if someone steps on this, definitely becomes slippery. So yes, that basically is a type of contamination, if you think of it in that way, because it's a barrier between the floor surface, which may well be slip resistant and the foot. So anything like that that is introducing a barrier is a form of contaminant, and you should think about what can be done to either not do that or potentially to look to use a slightly different surface that might provide a bit more grip. The challenge with polythene is, unless it's secured, it's going to slip both between your foot and the polythene potentially, but also between the polythene and the floor. So therefore you've kind of got lots of moving parts, which moving parts don't make good friction. Let's just say that. Okay, moving on to heel. Comment here, you mentioned during the spoiler alert that safety shoes weren't always slip resistant. Could you expand on that, please? Sure. So if you think about typical PPE policies, it will talk about a safety shoe. What does a safety shoe mean? It typically means steel toe cap, ankle protection, and a textured sole of some kind. And there are EN ratings for footwear, SRC standards. But in reality, they don't mean too much. So I would sort of use the analogy of perhaps an 11+ exam, whereas actually what you're looking for is a PhD when it comes to keeping people safe. What I would suggest that you use is HSE themselves have set up something called GRIP, which is a way of classifying footwear in terms of the slip resistance of the footwear itself, and they give a rating, and I would go down that route, particularly in areas that are higher risk. But I mean, what you shouldn't do, just like you wouldn't assume that a floor is safe just by looking at it and it looks textured, it must be safe. No, that's not right. Don't assume that the sole of a shoe is slip resistant just because it looks like it's got a bit of texture on it or a pattern on it or something, and therefore it might be slip resistant, because that isn't necessarily the case. And also you're going to need different soles are going to perform better under different contamination and with different types of floor surfaces as well. Second question on heel was, would test reports give information on the slip resistance of footwear needed for wet work areas? So I assume this means if we came out and did a slip safety survey, including pendulum slip testing, and did a report, we wouldn't within that report necessarily comment on the footwear specifically, but we can have that conversation with you afterwards. There's my doorbell going in the background. Moving on to individual, John asked, why did I not include behaviour as a factor for trips? You caught me out, John. Well done, you caught me out. No, that's quite right, actually. It should be included. There's a trip triangle, which the HSE talks about, which is what I was presenting to you guys. But you're right, it doesn't include behaviour, which is weird. So let me review that. But behaviour is absolutely a factor for trips, just as it is for slips. You know, if you're distracted, and actually the second question here is about that. So well, it's a comment. It's too often than not, those who trip are distracted or multitasking. Same rule should apply as in driving. Yeah, human factors play a role in trips and slips. You've got to bear that in mind when you're doing your risk assessment. So it's not good enough to say, well, this person was distracted and therefore it's entirely their fault. If you've got a slippery floor or if you've got trailing cables, you know, you do have a duty of care to do what's reasonable and what's practicable. So don't forget that. But yes, human factors do play a role, and it's important to try to figure out how to prevent that from being an issue too much. So thinking about avoiding distractions that you're putting in place. For example, we can't stop a member of the public looking at their phone. But if we put big blazing screens or loud music inside the entrance of a shop, and somebody looks at that and is distracted and then has an accident, then you know that's we're certainly contributing to that. And then maintenance. A couple of interesting questions here. Is the move from traditional cleaning products to more environmentally friendly versions creating a new challenge with slips? That's a very interesting topic. So I would say potentially the proof is always in the pudding. So the way to know if a cleaning product or a cleaning method is effective or not at keeping floors safe is to do a pendulum test, because you can test that floor as it is, you can then clean it and test it again, and that number will tell you what you need to know. A couple of comments though on this. We're seeing products coming out that are kind of enzyme based, and the idea, the concept of that is that the chemical, or the product should I say, because they say it's chemical free, leaves enzymes on the surface which eat up the grease. Now, my question around that would be, well, if you're leaving anything on the surface, are you really cleaning it? Because cleaning, the definition of cleaning is the removal of contamination from a surface. If you're leaving stuff behind, what's that doing to the slip resistance of the floor? Is that producing that barrier of contamination, which might make the floor slippery? The second point I'd make is that there are certain areas of buildings, there are certain types of contamination that unfortunately do just need stronger chemicals to really properly remove them. And so if we're going down the route of being more environmentally friendly, which of course is a good thing generally, you might want to just think about supplementing that with periodic deeper cleans that will be more effective. And again, the way of assessing how effective cleaning is by doing a pendulum slip test. Second point on maintenance, do floor cleaning agents and materials indicate their slip resistance under different conditions? Do we think that giving information like that would be helpful? I do think it would be helpful. I think that the challenge is that there'll always be bespoke requirements for individual floors, and that's why the pendulum slip test is so valuable, because you can go and literally do it on your floor wherever you are, and you can learn if a particular product is going to work for you in those conditions, a product or a method or whatever it might be. You know, if you manage a big estate of buildings, you might find that one particular method works fine in 7 out of 10 buildings, but in 3 out of 10 buildings, for whatever reason, it doesn't work. And it would be wrong to assume that just because it works somewhere else, it's going to work in that place. Moving on to environment, what percentage of slip incidents are caused by stairs? To be honest, I don't know. What I can tell you though is if somebody falls on stairs, they're much more likely to suffer a more serious accident, clearly because we've got gravity at play. So stair safety is really important. I think I said in the webinar that whether or not someone is actually slipping on stairs is an interesting question and a bit of a debate, because of the way you walk going down stairs. You don't have that traditional heel strike. You actually move your foot up and away and then down back on itself and plant it in a more flat-footed way. But certainly accidents on stairs are a big issue. And another related question, can anti-slip tape or treads used on stair edges actually cause somebody to trip due to grip? Yes, I could see that potentially happening. So something to be aware of. And then lastly, on surface, shouldn't there be, if such a thing doesn't already exist, some legislation guiding builders on floor surface finishes that are slip resistant, instead of leaving it as a choice, especially for public areas, so that some of the issues can be addressed at the design and build stage? The focus has been on prevention by practice rather than by design. Fully agree with that comment. What I would say is that the guidance on slip resistance is a little bit murky, in my opinion. So as part of my September campaign, I actually called for pendulum slip testing to be mandated in commercial buildings annually, and for clearer guidance to be published by the HSE. I wrote to the Secretary of State and the head of the HSE and various other people. It would be better if there were clearer guidance. The challenge, I think, is that the definitions, are always going to be difficult because of that reasonable practicality approach that we have in the UK when it comes to health and safety. So are there certain cases that are black and white? In my opinion, yes, there are. Swimming pools, external areas, kitchens, for example. You cannot make any salient argument that these are not foreseeably wet or contaminated areas, and therefore they should have floors that are inherently built and designed to achieve pendulum test values of 36 plus. But when it comes to other areas, you know, the majority of floors, in fact, there is always going to be a slight debate as to what level of slip resistance you need or not. So I think that we could and should make guidance clearer about these areas where it's unquestionably the case that floors are going to be contaminated and wet. But for other areas, I think, you know, it's going to be a bit more difficult, and that's where having some expert advice can be helpful. Great. Well, thanks again for attending or signing up for the webinar. Those were all the questions we got in addition to the questions we covered in the session. So I hope that's been helpful. Once again, do really recommend that you have a look at that CHIMES model and that you take the Slip Safety Scorecard to give yourself a score. There goes my phone. Give yourself a score for your performance on CHIMES. You can then book in a call with me, a Zoom call for 15 minutes, and there's no cost and no commitment to doing that. We can chat through the report, chat through the results, and give you some more insights based on your bespoke requirements. And you can get hold of those £1,000 worth of freebies. So I hope that's been useful, guys. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hopefully speak to you soon after you've taken the scorecards. Cheers.